hastily assembled F1 show podcast sponsored by Audi. The reason that we have assembled so hastily is because of the news that has broken this morning that after 20 years in charge of Red Bull Racing, their long-standing team principal, Christian Horner, has been sacked with immediate effect. He was the youngest team principal ever to be involved in an F1 team at the age of 31. He was appointed back in January 2005 when Red Bull purchased the Jaguar team. And he's gone on to great success, 4 back-to-back titles with Sebastian Vettel between 2010 and 2013, and the same with Max Verstappen between 2021 and 2024. In all, 6 constructors, 8 drivers, 124 wins, 107 pole positions, and 287 podiums. Red Bull Managing Director Oliver Minchloff has thanked him, and this was the statement that was released this morning. With his tireless commitment, experience, expertise, and innovative thinking, Christian has been instrumental in establishing Red Bull Racing as one of the most successful and attractive teams in Formula One. Thank you for everything. You will forever remain an important part of our team history. In response to that, Christian Horner has said that the reason for his sacking, he has not been given any reason. That is all we've heard so far. I'm joined to discuss this seismic news, really, by Karun Chandhok, by Ted Kravitz, and, of course, by Martin Brundle. First things first, guys. Martin, let's get your immediate reaction. I mean, I think this came out of the blue for everyone. Did it come out of the blue for you?
I saw Christian on Monday at the Eddie Jordan Memorial, and he was very, very quiet and very introvert, I must say. Clearly a bit out of sorts, so I'm perhaps not totally surprised. I'm saddened because I think Christian's done an incredible job picking up the bones of what was the Jaguar F1 team and what he's achieved in the last 20 years there, and I consider him a friend. So it's a pity it's ended so abruptly like this. I did try to speak to Christian before we did this. He said he'll talk later, but that he hadn't been given any reason. So it is seismic because he was such an integral part of the Red Bull team. He got Adrian Newey involved, and for example, every point, every podium, every victory, every world championship that Max has, and other drivers like Sebastian Vettel, Christian was at the helm.
Well, he had a contract till 2030, but obviously, he's been released early or removed from his position. Karun, what was your reaction? I mean, actually, we were having our regular Wednesday Sky F1 catch-up when the news broke, and everyone's like, right, okay, let's drop what we're doing because it's just huge news.
It is massive news, absolutely. I mean, there were a few rumblings in Austria when we were there over the weekend that, there was still that friction that seemed to have been sparked back in Bahrain last year, divisions in the camp between, sort of, should we say, Team Verstappen, and then the Austrian side with Helmut Marko versus the Thailand side, which seemed to back Christian Horner. So this has been building, it feels like, for a while. There were rumblings in the paddock in Austria, sort of a couple of weeks ago that it was ramping up as these Max Verstappen rumors started to rise again. Would he leave and go to Mercedes? And there was a lot of talk about whether, it was a case of Christian stays or Verstappen stays. So I can't say it's been a complete shock, but still, as you say, fairly seismic news, because for all of us who've seen Red Bull over the last 20 years, Christian Horner was Red Bull. He was the team principal who was there every session, every single qualifying, every single race day. He was the man who was there. But crucially, he was never a shareholder or an owner of a team, unlike a Toto Wolff. And I think that's been a crucial part of this. And in the end, the shareholders and the owners have decided to dispense of his services.
Yeah, I think, Simon, we've known, haven't we, that there has been this split in the camp ever since really sort of Bahrain last year, where Jos Verstappen came out and said it's all chaos. Christian needs to leave. It can't continue if Christian stays. He survived that, just like he survived so many controversies. I mean, the Piranha Club of Formula One team bosses is well known, and Christian was the longest serving after, of course, the death of the great Sir Frank Williams, Christian was the longest serving team boss in Formula One, appointed in 2005. So, as you say, for 20 years. And in that real, well, it's a piranha club, the cutthroat world of the team bosses. You make friends, you make enemies. It remained to be seen how long he was going to take before it was the piranhas, the other piranhas that ate him up. But in the end, it seems to be the Helmut Marko, the Oliver Mintzlaff side, the Austrian side of the business, backed by Jos Verstappen, and we assume Max Verstappen, have won in the power struggle. And they've managed to convince whatever backers Christian had in the team, whether it was the 51% owners of Red Bull, the Uvidia family, that it just wasn't tenable for him to carry on. What it was related to? Was it related to the car's performance? Was it related to the fact that Max is out of the world championship? Was it related to anything else? Will come out in time. And then, of course, what happens to Christian Horner next? It's not by any means certain that he's out of Formula One, isn't he, Simon? We'll come to that. But it is pretty shocking that it's happened, because he was just such a big name and a long-serving name in the sport.
Before I get into the timeline of how it happened, and that it starts, as you rightly pointed out, probably with the death of Dietrich Mateschitz, which was late 2022. I actually remember us all being on air when that happened in Austin, Martin, and you finding that out then. Let's just focus, if we could, on the success in the 20 years. As you said, you count him as a friend, and he came from Arden. He was desperate to get into Formula One, and then together with recruiting Adrian Newey and a great team, he built this thing out of what was Jaguar and turned it into the huge sprawling campus in Milton Keynes, now with an engine department. You have to just take your hat off, first of all, and say what a great job, obviously, he did there at Red Bull during his time and everything that he built.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah, when you go down what is now closed road on the industrial estate, he's moved it from one building with lots of mezzanines into, along with how Formula One's developed in that time. I think, what we're seeing now is the sort of maverick talisman team leader. They've become such massive enterprises now that it's all changing, and you see James Vowles running Williams. You see Jonathan Wheatley, TP at Sauber Audi, for example, and Andreas Stella, a team principal, and what a job he's doing at McLaren. So we've got a division of the responsibility because the teams have become so big. But along the way, Christian, I mean, he's created a bit of trouble along the way in terms of he's always had plenty to say and poking, but that's his job. You've got to slow the opposition down and speed your team up. But I can't help but think the wheels started to come off when Dietrich Mateschitz died, and to all intents and purposes, I think he's been a passenger as well since Bahrain last year, when that news came out, and the tail's been wagging the dog a bit, because obviously Team Verstappen have been briefing certain journalists, and Christian's just come more and more under pressure, and he lost key people like Adrian Newey, like Rob Marshall, like Jonathan Wheatley. I think his failing on that was convincing himself and trying to convince everybody else that they weren't really doing that much anymore, and it really didn't matter. He'd got a better crew behind them, but that wasn't correct. And I think we've seen, but let's remember, this is a team that was on pole position last weekend in Silverstone, one of the toughest circuits in the world, and have won 2 Grand Prix this year. It's not exactly like it's been a disaster, and they've completely non-performed. But I think there were too many things working against him, and I think eventually he had a lot of support from Shalom Yavidia, and I think eventually that's faded away, and the inevitables happened.
As I said, on our Sky News, I remember Christian as an F3000 team boss. That's when I first met him, and in negotiating at the time, he gave me my first test in F1. He came to Barcelona to watch that first test, and it somewhat surprised me. It was a winter test in November 2007, and he was there, overseeing every single lap that the cars ran, wanting to be a big part of every detail as the team was building up. It was very much him and Adrian building the team up at that stage. They'd only had, I think, one podium at that point. So he's been a huge part of that success story. But I was thinking about it, Simon. I think in some of what's happened, if you look at it in recent years, is it's become a one-car team, right? We've talked about how really since Daniel Ricciardo's left, the way the car design has gone, the way the team has been structured, it's very much all the eggs in the Max Verstappen camp and in that basket. And ultimately, that's kind of created his downfall because it's put a disproportionate amount of power into Team Verstappen, to the point of which where if you're the wider Red Bull group, you look at it and go, hang on a second. Yes, Max is on pole of the British Grand Prix. Yes, he's won 2 races this year, but the other car's nowhere. And actually, it's put a huge amount of power in Max's camp. If he leaves, that team, they'd be 4th, 5th best on the grid at the moment. So I think that has been one of the failings. And ultimately, Christian's got to carry the can for that because he's the man in charge. He's led that philosophy of, structuring the team in that way. Maybe it's happened by accident, but the reality is he's the man in charge. And I think there's a strong element of that is he's put a lot of power and faith into Team Verstappen. And I wonder if that's ultimately come back to bite him a bit.
Well, then why has he been dismissed then? I mean, that's the question. We're not quite sure. Has he been dismissed because Verstappen isn't going to win the championship? Has he been dismissed because they're not going to win the constructors? Well, they didn't win last year's constructors. Has he been dismissed because only one guy can drive the car? That is the question that we think Christian is asking himself at the moment. And why has he gone? As Martin says, they've won 2 races. It was on pole. It's not too bad, but you get rid of, Max leaves if he does. Yuki Tsunoda finished last the last 2 races, didn't he? With penalties in both races, not helping his cause. And we know that Liam Lawson, the predecessor, hasn't become a bad racing driver because he was 6th in Austria. So it's really difficult. But as for relationships go, Simon, Christian was a racer, wasn't he? You could say that about him. And journalists like yourself and myself, Simon, had a different relationship with him than racing drivers who he considered their equal. But he always dealt really, I had an interesting relationship with him, known him since he was in Formula 3000. He told me he was going to be in Formula 1 and we'd be seeing much more of each other when I was a reporter at ITV and he was still boss of the Arden Formula 3000 team. And then he came, that was 2004. And then 2005, he appeared in the paddock and said, see, I told you so. I'm the boss of Red Bull. But he always dealt with the likes of us journalists as a kind of a batsman, fielding a tricky ball from a fast bowler, didn't he, Simon? He'd sometimes have a go at you or me for a tricky question, but knowing that we were having to do our jobs. In that regard, he knew what he was doing, how to play the game, and he thought he was playing it as best he could.
Yeah, he was absolutely not averse to pushing the agenda that he wanted to push on Sky F1 or onto journalists. We saw that, and sometimes he had to see through it. But this is the timeline. They're all guilty, by the way, of that as well. This is Formula One after all. But let's just go back to the start. As I mentioned, Dietrich Mateschitz dying in late 22. Rob Marshall leaving to go to McLaren in 23. Then the allegations of inappropriate behaviour made against him in February 2024. 3 weeks later, he was cleared of wrongdoing through an internal inquiry, and then it was dismissed following an appeal last summer. He's consistently, by the way, I must say, denied those allegations of inappropriate behaviour. Adrian Newey leaving in springtime of last year. Jonathan Wheatley at the end of the year, and Will Courtney going to McLaren as head strategist. I believe he starts next year, plus all the other engineers that you don't hear about and the aerodynamicists behind the scenes. I come back to this, and to your point, actually, Ted, that he's never really had a driver to match Max Verstappen, but all empires crumble. We see that so many times with different teams. We saw it with Mercedes at the end of the turbo hybrid era, and Zach Brown, one of his main competitors since they've become competitive, has always been at pains to point out that he believes that Christian had lost the dressing room. Would you agree with those sentiments? And do you think it was just the weight of pressure of one thing after another that ultimately led to him perhaps losing the backing of Uvidia, who was the man we understand that was backing him up until the results really started to go against him, Martin?
Yes, I think so. I mean, they did have a string of great drivers, of course, with DC, Mark Webber, Seb Vettel, Daniel Ricciardo. But we've also seen a lot of great young drivers who are still on the grid, like Albon, Sainz, Gasly, wrecked basically because Max Verstappen is so unbelievably fast. And I think the problem Christian had is that Max became he had to focus everything on Max, and that's hurt the team. I think to an extent in general. I think that he had a decent following there. There's lots of people like Giampiero Lambiase and Pedals, as we know him as well, and Rocky and all sorts of key people who have stayed there. It's a team of well over 1,000 people. So I think you won't know unless you're really inside the team. I don't feel able to say that he'd lost the dressing room of the team. But there's no doubt he's been under a lot of pressure this last 18 months. And we must also mention that his former partner Beverly died 8 days ago, the mother of his daughter. And that is, he's been to hell and back in the last few days, Christian. And I think we need to recognize that and remember that. But business is business, and they've decided to make a change. And we're talking about Formula One teams that spend 300-400 million pounds a year and represent a lot of people, represent a brand on a global basis. And for whatever reason, they've decided that Christian's not the man to lead them into the next phase, that Lauren Mekis is, and other people they'll no doubt put around him. So it's just odd at this time. It's a strange time to do it, and a strange urgency, I would say, to that. So, we don't know what's gone on behind closed doors, but I do know that Team Verstappen were not happy with him there. And does that mean Max is more likely to stay now or less likely to stay? My gut feeling is it means he's more likely to stay in the team for next year, regardless of what kind of exit clause he might have in his contract. So, it's a complex business. And I completely agree with what was said earlier on. Christian will now turn up in another team somewhere as a part owner or a team boss. I have no doubt about that. It doesn't mean he's leaving Formula One. I'd be pretty sure.
No, and actually, it was only a month ago that we were talking about Ferrari and the rumours that had been speaking to them. He's very good friends with Flavio Briatore, so you wonder. I mean, obviously Steve Nielsen's now been put in place there, but nothing's ever set in stone in this sport. That's one thing you do learn from being involved in it as long as we have. But I'm interested in what you were saying there about the war with the Verstappen camp, in particular Jos. As you mentioned, it really did come to the surface in Bahrain after the allegations that he denied. But it has been. What's the end game? What's the end game? Do they want a team that they have full control of? They control who's in power. Do they want to run it themselves? I'm sort of slightly perplexed as to what the end game is here. He's got a contract till the end of 2028, but if it's not the fastest car, are the Verstappen's actually going to want to stay there after the end of 2026? It strikes me as an interesting one that's going to be answered, isn't it, in the fullness of time, Karun?
Absolutely. I think there's a big question underneath that question you just asked, Simon, which is obviously Christian has led them into this decision to become an engine manufacturer. This was something that he pushed Mr. Mateschitz to commit to. They've employed hundreds of people. They're investing, a huge amount of money and have invested into becoming an engine company. They're not a car manufacturer, so it's a massive leap of faith for Red Bull to have scaled up into that. So they're partnering with Ford, but ultimately it's a Red Bull powertrains engine with support from Ford. So it's I think who's going to take on all of that? It feels like Laura Mecki's as CEO has been announced as sort of an interim step. But there's a big change coming within Red Bull to become a full in-house operation like Ferrari and Mercedes. Really, that there's only going to be three of them as a full in-house, everything under a single roof. So I don't know what the end game is. You're absolutely right, because if the engine isn't good, then Max is going to be off anyway. He's going to be on the phone to Lawrence Stroll and Ferrari and Toto and all this stuff anyway. So I think it's a very valid question. I'm not entirely sure we're able to answer it at this stage. I think we've somewhat got to wait and see how it plays out. But one thing's for sure, Christian set them onto this path now of becoming an engine manufacturer. And I don't think that can't be underestimated, because there's a big change coming at the entire Red Bull Racing and Racing Bulls camp, of course, as well.
I think 2027 is really interesting, isn't it? Because, if we're saying that the best guess, and we should stress that, is that by doing this, by getting rid of Christian, Oliver Mintzlaff and Red Bull have bought themselves Max Verstappen services for 2026, for next year. If the best guess is that, something that Christian said to me on Friday after the team boss's press conference now comes back into my mind, where I said to him, are people, and by that I meant the Verstappen camp, guilty sometimes of worrying about something in Formula One that they don't know is definitely going to happen? And do they just need to see what happens and then make a decision? And he latched onto that immediately. He was like, yes, absolutely. The people need to see. There is no guarantee that the Mercedes is going to be a best place to be next year. We don't know that. We don't know that our engine, he didn't say this, but he's paraphrasing. We didn't know that we're going to be struggling with our engine. There's nothing to say that which car is going to be good in 2026. And then he said, so I think what people need to do is to see what happens next year, and then they can decide for 2027. And then I thought, well, hang on, hasn't Max got a contract till the end of 28? So why is Christian effectively tacitly saying that, look, a message to Max, just hang on a sec, let's see what 2026 brings, and then we can talk about 2027. And if we think then George Russell is right in saying he thinks it's a very slim chance he won't be a Mercedes driver in 2026, is this all a game about 2027? And if then Mintzlaff and the people at Red Bull are thinking, okay, we've bought Max's services for next year, that's confirmed by doing this, by getting rid of Horner, they could have lost Verstappen in 2027. They could lose Verstappen and Christian Horner, and then be in an even worse place. If we think that Mekis is only a stopgap, as you say, Karun, maybe we can get onto that as well. I would imagine Laurent Mekis is a stopgap. I'm not sure he'd want to uproot everything that he's building at Racing Bulls and Faenza in Italy. They do have an alternative team boss there, and Peter Bayer. I guess they could carry on, so they could lose Mekis, even though he's a good leader. But but who Red Bull go for long term next is a different matter. Steve Nielsen, you mentioned, Karun, he's only MD of the company. He's not the team principal of Alpine. So Alpine are looking for a team principal.
Okay, let's head up to Milton Keynes and get some reaction from on site. David Croft is there alongside Craig Slater.
Here outside the Red Bull factory, it's currently lunchtime, so there's a lot of comings and there's a lot of goings. And Craig, we've been stood here for a while, and whilst nobody is speaking officially and all communication has been handled from Austria, we've managed to grab a couple of words with a workforce that were very loyal to Christian Horner and are hugely saddened by today's news.
Yeah, we saw one young lady in tears. We didn't speak to her. Others talked about being gutted, Crofty, that he has gone. He was very much the leader here, wasn't he? And maybe people from the outside saw him as a little bit of an anti-hero in Formula One. He cut a figure that not everyone. He was a bit of a Marmite man, I suppose. Not everyone was not to everyone's taste. But in here, the loyalty was absolute because, as you point out, he won them things.
Yes. 14 World Championships, 127 races, so 124 races, 107 poles, 287 podiums. One employee that we spoke to had been here for 20 years and has said that Christian unified the workforce here. Was a man that was never afraid to stand and have a chat. We understand that it was a very emotional speech that Christian gave at 10 o'clock this morning here at Red Bull Racing HQ, and he broke down on occasion and received a massive ovation as well from the workforce here. At a site that 20 years ago, if you'd have come here, well, you wouldn't.
It was 2 or 3
that.
units, I think, Crofty,
exactly.
wasn't it? It's now 10 or 12.
Yeah.
I think it's 5 times the size it was. It has an engine power plant now
which is
online.
way over the back, and then it has a wind tunnel over to that side as well. And the expansion is so much that we can't get any closer than here, because beyond the public footpath, that is all now Red Bull property, and they have expanded. And he has been a brilliant team principal for this Red Bull team. Lauren Mekis now comes in. He will know a lot of the workforce. He's based here 2 or 3 times a week, even before getting that promotion. But it has been interesting to see the sadness on the faces of the staff, and also on Christian Horner as well, who left at 11:25 this morning. And I know that for a fact because I was stood right there as he came past in his car and out of the gates for what will now be the last time. Yeah,
unless quirks of fate bring him back for a second term somehow or other. So in terms of how long was this in the offing for? Well-placed people, senior figures from within Formula One telling me it was not absolutely certain, and Horner would not have been aware of it at Silverstone itself. There's been some speculation that he was allowed that as a kind of a last home hurrah before he left. But according to people we've spoken to, that is not the case. We believe the decision was finalised on Monday. It would have been communicated to him then, and to Red Bull's major partners, of which there are quite a lot in these years of success they have. And then, as you say, he came into the factory and made his speech. One thing I would say is that Laurent Mekis has taken over. Helmut Marko's on site today. And for those that wish to cast this as a kind of Marko stroke Austrian head office stroke Verstappen party winning a power struggle here, is it true to a degree, or are there more factors at work, would you say? I
think there's probably more factors at work, and I'm sure that will be discussed at length on the podcast here. It's a combination of matters. It's not just one particular incident, but support from Red Bull and senior figures in Austria as well in the statement about Christian, support from Ford too, who are partnering, of course, next year with Red Bull for their engine. And I know that you've got a statement from the Ford Motor Company about Christian's departure.
Well, it's interesting because he was very much in charge of the engine. In fact, it persuaded Dietrich Mateschitz that they should go and build their own rather than buddy up with Volkswagen Group and Porsche, who wanted the control. Well, Ford have said this. I mean, I'm sure other partners will weigh in as well. Ford would like to thank Christian Horner for his partnership and commitment to the Red Bull Ford Powertrains program. We remain focused on our joint development of the 2026 Red Bull Power Unit and our broader relationship with Red Bull, and we look forward to our return to the F1 grid in 2026. A short statement there.
Short statement from Ford. Business continues as usual here at the Red Bull factory. But right there, just beyond the flagpole, is an empty office. That was Christian Horner's office. Now will be Lauren Mekis' office. The clear up on the desk, I think, is continuing. But for the moment, it lies without an occupant.
Do you think, Martin, it came down to the Verstappen camp saying it's either us or him?
I don't know, but what's absolutely clear is that the Verstappen camp have been lobbing in hand grenades for quite some months now, and some of them have gone off. And it's been pretty relentless in that respect. And I think at times Max's dad, Jos, has made it absolutely clear that he thinks Christian shouldn't be leading the company and leading the team. So I would say yes, they played a key role in Christian's exit, but as I say, unless you're in the office behind closed doors, then you don't know for certain. But there are certain things I do know, and certain things I have seen and heard that makes me think they were pretty involved in this decision.
Going on to then where we think he might end up, as we mentioned, there were two options potentially. We know that Fred Vasseur's been under a bit of pressure at Ferrari lately, and you wondered actually with those stories, with what we're now, with the benefit of hindsight now, seeing those stories linking Christian with Ferrari a month or so ago, you wonder if he actually realised perhaps that the writing, Ted, was on the wall. Could you see him ending up at somewhere like Maranello? I mean, they've chopped and changed. Fred is an extremely popular team principal, particularly with Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton, because he shepherded them through early parts of their career. But we know that they are desperate. They've been such a long time without success. And Christian doesn't guarantee success, but he has seen success here at Red Bull. Would he be something in the long term that you think might turn the head of the board at Maranello and those in charge?
I mean, a couple of months ago, since the events of Bahrain last year, Christian's kind of MO has just been, let's get through this. It's business as normal. I'm still in charge. We can get through this. He's survived all of that. Since then, he had an approach from Ferrari, and if he thought he wasn't going to survive, then he might have taken that a little bit more seriously. But with his family, with his 3 kids, does he really want to uproot all of them? Does he want to go and live in Italy by himself? Would he want to bring the 3 kids out of school? Would his wife move to Italy as well? So I think for those reasons, for that personal reason, firstly, and secondly, that maybe he saw resurrecting Ferrari as a job, a non-Italian speaker and someone who doesn't really know it would be a little bit of a too steep a hill to climb. Much better if he thought that Alpine was an option, another British-based team with Flavio there, with a team that's very like Red Bull. In fact, most of Enstone and Milton Keynes kind of join in each other. A lot of people in Enstone are ex-Red Bull and vice versa. That would be a much easier place for him to go. So I think the Ferrari option, tempting as it might have been, especially a few months ago, knowing what was going to happen today, he might have thought, oh, maybe I should have taken that. But I think he already made his mind up not to do Ferrari. And if Alpine is an option, then that's a much better way to go.
I agree, Ted. I think that Christian will be desperate to get a stake in a team going forward and have some ownership rather than to be a hired hand, really. And you obviously won't be able to do that at Ferrari, but as entertaining as that job might be.
I agree with all the above. I do think there's these rumors about Ferrari. It kept popping up in it over the last decade. Christian to Ferrari thing. I do think a combination of Christian and Newey to Ferrari was a much more attractive package for Ferrari. I think it's to me, I could see him landing at Alpine more than I could see him landing at Ferrari now. I think Ferrari are going to try and build their own thing, and Ted's right. There's a lot of other factors coming in. The stage of Christian's career and life. Does he want to uproot everything? From where he lives, the commute to Enstone is pretty much going to be the same as the commute to Milton Keynes. So I can see that being a more likely destination. And of course, he and Flavio, both very old friends of Bernie Ecclestone. Bernie brought Christian to F1 when Red Bull bought the team. He was instrumental in Christian getting that job back in 2005. Flavio doesn't want to be team principal. He doesn't want to run the team day to day. He's got Steve Nielsen there as the MD. But I can imagine there's a few wheels and cogs being turned in the backgrounds, for Christian to at least have a role there.
Well, let's not forget, of course, Lewis Hamilton is at Ferrari for the next couple of years. So there's been a lot of water under that particular relationship bridge, hasn't there, between Lewis Hamilton and Christian Horner. So I mean, you never know. You got to work with everybody in this business, but I'm not quite sure if Lewis, having been so vociferous and backing Fred Vasseur over the last month or so, was to say not only have Ferrari lost Fred Vasseur, but they've replaced him with Christian Horner as well, who they haven't exactly been constant dinner dates with each other, have they? So, yeah, I'm not sure that would have worked out. And John Elkann might have reflected on that. I mean, Charles Leclerc doesn't have any history with Christian Horner, but Lewis does a bit. But, yeah, maybe that's something to consider.
Yeah, and also just to go back to Martin's point, obviously it's a hugely difficult time in Christian's personal life, particularly for his daughter at the moment, and perhaps a sabbatical from the sport and the timing of it at the moment might be a factor as well in the decision that he makes going forward. So, yeah, it's important to be cognizant of that, I think, at this time. I just want to pick up on a few other things, and I suppose because of the plates that are all now spinning, because when you get something like this, news of this size, Martin, that happens in Formula One, it has a number of knock-on effects. As we were saying, Lauren McKees comes in and will take over at Red Bull, and Alan Permain gets a job, doesn't he, as team principal? Good old Alan Permain, who's been around the houses, started as an engineer with Benetton back in 1997. He was a kind of race engineer for the likes of Jarno Trulli and Giancarlo Fisichella, and chief race engineer for Renault. Then he became the COO of Renault in 2011 and left in 2003 when it was Alpine, and when Otmar left, then came to the Racing Bulls as racing director, and now he finds himself as a team principal. I don't think there's a person up and down the paddock who knows Alan Permain that would begrudge him a chance at being a team principal, because he's a lovely fella, and he knows. Well, he's forgotten what most of us know about Formula One, hasn't he, Martin? He's one of the stalwarts of the paddock.
I would agree. I first met him when I was driving at Benetton. Actually, he was working on Michael Schumacher's car on the other side of the garage. Great guy, and this is what we're seeing more of now, as I mentioned before, with Jonathan Wheatley, with James Vowles, with Andrea Stella, for example. You're seeing people with a huge amount of varied experience at the coalface of a Formula One team, technically, how they function. And so maybe the overall commercial leadership and the marketing and sponsorship leaders are different people now. It's too big for one person. So we're seeing people who know the nuts and bolts of how a Formula One team comes together, how it travels, how it functions, and how it operates at its best. And we're seeing more and more on that. So it makes a lot of sense. And I the first thing I did was send Alan a WhatsApp to say congratulations and well deserved, because he's a top guy. I remember talking to him. We were having a barbecue in the BRDC farm last year, actually, with Jonathan Wheatley. They had some fabulous food in, and I said to Alan, 24, you do all 24 races. That's a lot, isn't it? Is it it's too much, isn't it? He went, no, I'd like there to be more. I just want to be at Formula One all the time. And that kind of mentality and energy and passion for the business will serve him very well.
Yeah, actually, when you look at it, if you take, I wonder if a number of teams, it's like people, are at pains to try to copy innovation within the technology of the sport. But if you look at the model that McLaren have built, whereby they've got someone who is a marketing guru and knows exactly how to bring sponsors like Zach Brown as CEO, who brings in an engineer like Andrea Stella beneath him, who, as Martin, we were talking about at the weekend, people would literally walk off a cliff for Andreas Stella. He's that kind of leader, and they've got that, haven't they? They get the commercial flywheel working there, and then you have the engineering flywheel working, and they're kind of symbiotic. And when they do so, like this, you can see that McLaren were able to make a turnaround in the case of a season back in 2023 and catch people up, and then progress from there. So it's incredible, isn't it? And I think that's one of the things that's becoming rather ubiquitous in Formula One right now. Karun.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you look at it, you've got Toto at Mercedes, you've got Fred at Ferrari, but pretty much every other team, we don't know who's going to end up at Alpine as TP, but pretty much every other team has got either engineer turned team principal or, sort of operational leader, team manager turned team principal. You just mentioned Jonathan Whitley, James Vowles, Andrea Stella, Ayo Komatsu. They've all gone through that particular path, haven't they? So there is a trend. I think you're right. But I think, it feels like a changing of the era in some ways, and Christian is, as Ted mentioned, one of those who was at almost of a previous era of that Frank Williams, Ron Dennis sort of thing, where they didn't have an engineering background per se. Obviously, Ron Dennis came through as a mechanic, but they were leaders. They were leaders of teams. They were leaders of the organizations. And Christian was kind of the last of that era, along with Toto.
Okay, finally, then, we can talk about George Russell and his contract situation. What's he thinking now? Is he thinking, Verstappen's got his own team. Maybe I'm going to sign with Toto. Do we all agree that this leads that it's more likely that Max, as you pointed out, Martin, Max is going to stay, at least for the moment, with Red Bull, and George will be getting, come on, Toto, now let's go, let's sign this. What do we think on that one, Ted?
Yeah, I think it is more like, certainly for 2026, although we'd kind of come to that conclusion anyway at Silverstone, that certainly George is going to get another year's deal, and then the Max is going to see how it works. I mean, the crucial question is, what will the Red Bull powertrains engine be like next year? Will it be, good enough for Max to think, okay, I can live with this, with the 3 times the amount of hybrid recovery and power to be used than what they have now. And Mercedes have always been very good on the power unit side, so Red Bull technologies and their powertrains will have to be absolutely tip top. George will be thinking, I can probably stay beyond that, but it's still open. It's 27, as we've said, is still open. And what Red Bull won't have, if it's not going particularly well, is a racer with that experience that Christian Horner has, and someone able to kind of get them out of. Horner's done it before. Remember the Renault years when they weren't winning because the Renault engine wasn't going? He pressured Renault. He got on Cyril Abiteboul's case. He got Renault back, and then they won again. So he knows how to get themselves, when the empires do crumble, Horner knows how to build it up again. And that's what Red Bull will miss, I think.
Karun?
I think so. Stability, but they haven't been stable for a while. I think there's, he played the politics very well, I thought. He always kept them on the right side when it came to the games with F1 and the FIA and stuff. Christian was, he was prepared to lob those grenades out in the public, but also even behind the scenes. You'd often see him having those quiet meetings with the Liberty bosses and things like that. So he played the politics well, which is a big job of being a team principal, trying to get your team into the right side and the right position. He did upset some people along the way. Let's not forget that the reason they had to create their own engine company is because nobody would supply them an engine. There were points at which, he fell out with certain people and he couldn't get a Ferrari and he couldn't get a Mercedes engine. So they've, when Honda, there were issues going on there, they've had to go down this path. So, I think ultimately they'll miss his experience. They'll miss his leadership. But, let's see what the future holds.
Last one, Martin, to you. On the basis of everything that's happened here, does it show that right now, funnily enough, the ultimate power in Formula One lies with the best driver, the generational talent that is Max Verstappen, and his recent results where he's just hauled this car that would be nowhere without him, has demonstrated that he is a cut above the rest and he can do what he wants and go where he wants when he wants?
To an extent, I think nobody would argue that he's the best driver, anything other than he's the best driver on the grid. He's worth a tenth or two, and that's very hard to find in Formula One. We often see first two rows of the grid covered by a tenth. So um, drivers come and go, and if I, you 2 weeks is a long time in politics, they say. Well, it's certainly a very long time in Formula One. So we'll see how this plays out, but. If I was Christian Horner, I'd be feeling pretty bruised because obviously he's done a superb job for Red Bull and the Verstappens in everything he's achieved there. And same with George. If I were George Russell, I'd be feeling slightly aggrieved that I'm second or third, appeared to be second or third favourite for the role. But it's it's difficult to know. As I say, drivers come and go, people come and go, and a team has a certain momentum as an awful lot of people, and I think that will continue. I don't see Red Bull falling over overnight, and they'll have this momentum. They were gutted because they did their own power unit because Honda were leaving, and then Honda didn't leave. And I'm sure they wouldn't have done their own power unit if they thought they could continue with Honda, who of course are going to Aston Martin. So let's see. I don't think it will affect Red Bull instantly, and I don't think that's the end of Christian Horner. And the time we get to the next race, we'll to an extent be talking about something else. So I think we have to put it all in perspective.
Thanks, chaps. Thank you for dropping everything. But when you get a slice of news that is this seismic, as we've said before, it is absolutely our responsibility to come and do that. And there we are. That's it. Mark the date, the 9th of July, 2025. After 20 extremely successful years in charge, Christian Horner has been sacked as team principal of Red Bull. Thanks to Karun, thanks to Ted, and of course, thanks to Martin Brundle. You'll be able to follow this story on Sky Sports News, and we will return in 2.5 weeks' time in Spa. And I wonder how the story will have moved on by then. From us all here, bye-bye.